I, Titik Shah, welcome you all to yet another UK chapter of the Right Circle, which is being organized by Oxford Business College, Oxford, Kriti UK Birmingham, and Sampath Birmingham under the auspices of the British Council. I'm grateful to the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, an NGO based in Kolkata, who initiated this project of the Right Circle in 2015. And they've been facilitating this to over 30 cities in India and internationally, aimed at promoting acclaimed Indian authors writing in English. It's a social non-government organization, and its activities are aimed in the arena of betterment of education, culture, art, and women empowerment. We are very, very privileged today with this opportunity of having a legend author, an historian, a primarily a biographer of international repute, although I believe he hated history in school simply because of the way it was taught. And he will be sharing his inspiration behind his writings today. Dr. Vikram Sampath hails from Bangalore, and he's also the director of and founder of the Bangalore Lit Fest. He's an engineer and mathematician from BITS Pilani, and he's done his MBA in finance from Mumbai. Vikram is also a Carnatic vocalist and not one to rest with just a few laurels. Vikram also has a doctorate in history and music from the University of Queensland, Australia. And to top it all, he sketches, draws, and paints too. He has four acclaimed books published, first one being Splendors of Royal Mysore, the untold story of the Wadiyars, which is a work that has taken him almost a decade of research that traces the 600 years long history of Mysore, its royal family, and the culture. His second book, My Name is Gauhar Jan, the life and times of a musician born in Calcutta, who was India's first commercially recorded artist when technology came to India from England. It's one of my favorite books too, by the way. His third book is a biography on Veena maestro, the late S. Balchandar, Voice of the Veena. And his latest book is a two-volume monumental biography, Sarwarkar, Echoes of the Past, that has gone on to be a national bestseller and is in the process of writing the second volume, I believe. Awarded the Sahitya Academy's first Yuva Puraskar in English literature in 2012, and Excellence in Historical Research, awarded by the ARSC in New York for his book Gauhar Jan. The book is also adapted to theatre as a play Gauhar by our very own Lilith Dubey, and is being adapted to a Bollywood film by Ashutosh Govarikar. In conversation today with Dr. Sampath is Shefali Vaidya from Pune, who is an award-winning multilingual author, newspaper columnist, a motivational speaker, and she has written on diverse topics like travel, politics, Hindu temple architecture, parenting, and Goan history. And she's a very, very familiar face on our news debates. Currently, Shefali is busy working on her books in English, Marathi, and Konkani. As she says, raising three opinionated teenagers and two unruly dogs, and growing her own vegetables. Before I hand over the virtual platform to Shefali, may I inform our audience that there will be a Q&A at the end of the conversation. So please click the raise your hand icon at the end of the conversation so that Kathy can unmute you, and you're welcome to use the chat box to pose any questions. Thank you, and over to you, Shefali.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Titiksha, and thanks to Prabha Khaitan Foundation for giving me this chance to have a conversation with Vikram. It's always a pleasure talking to Vikram because he's so multifaceted that it's a pleasure listening to him. So my first question to you, Vikram, is as Titiksha just rattled out your CV, it's an impressive CV. And you seem to have done everything that is there to be done. You're an engineer and a MBA by education. You are a historian by inclination. You are a musician and a musicologist by passion. And now you are a biographer and a writer by profession. That's commendable. But my question to you is, what's a nice engineer MBA like you doing in this fractious field of history and biography writing?
Yeah, a very good afternoon to everyone there, and thank you to Prabhakar Foundation, to Diksha and everyone there, and to my dear friend Shefali. I think in the new normal, this is how we meet in the best way. While earlier, in Lit Fest, we were always co-panelists and so on. So now I think this is the thing that we all need to get used to.
That's right.
That's a great compliment coming from someone like you, who herself wears numerous hats, turbans, with so much acclaim. So yes, I jokingly say confusion is a part of my CV as well. But otherwise, it just so happens that if you see the history of historians who've written a lot of the modern
Mhm.
history of India, most of them were engineers, the British surveyors and engineers who got interested in the layout of the land, the people, the culture, and then ended up writing what were survey books about the people and
Mhm.
culture, which later became historical chronicles. So I think there is some tradition of engineers turning into historians when they realize that engineering is not really something that tickles their interest. For me, Shefali, as I think Titiksha mentioned in passing, history as a subject in school was extremely, something that I did not quite enjoy, which I'm sure a lot of kids in India don't, because of the way it is taught.
Mhm. Yes.
Very, very boring, pedantic, rote learning, who succeeded who and which war. Information which actually a child doesn't understand. What relevance does that have in his or her life, or when they grow up? The importance of history as a discipline is never told to us that way. And incidentally, in my family, all my elders, particularly my maternal grandmother, my Aji, used to tell me so many stories, from mythology as well as from history. And I would wonder, a subject which my grandmother could make so interesting, why is it that my history teacher puts me off to sleep with the same thing? So serendipitously, there was this serial on television called The Sword of Tipu Sultan, produced by Sanjay Khan and brought out by Doordarshan, I think the 90s or so, which caught my attention. And I was a boy of 12 or 13 then. And in the serial, if you remember, the ruling house of Mysore, the Wadiyars,
That's
the
right.
Maharaja and the Maharani, they were shown in an extremely poor light. The Maharaja
Yes.
was shown like this, obese retard who was dancing along with the court dancer. The Maharani was one of these typical, vamps from an Ekta Kapoor
Hmm.
serial who was all the time conniving and conspiring to throw Tipu Sultan away. And it was the usual classic ploy that, is employed, where to highlight Tipu, who was actually the son of a usurper of the throne of Mysore. You had to show the original Hindu kings and their family in poor light, to show him as the benefactor, while he was actually a despot and a usurper. So there were lots of protests in different parts of Karnataka, because even now, after so many decades, the royal house of Mysore is held in a lot of regard and reverence. In fact, when the last scion of the family, Shrikanta Datta Wadiyar, passed away a couple of years back, the whole of Mysore town just voluntarily shut down. Nobody asked. It was not a band or a hartal. People just voluntarily, they out of respect for the family and for the person, it just shut down. So that apple cart was somewhere, I think, upset by this serial. And see,
That's
and
right.
if you remember, even the studio caught fire, and Sanjay Khan's
Yes.
face got burnt, and
Yes. Yes.
local newspapers were saying this is all a curse of the Maharaja. You show him in poor light, and this is what happened. So as a boy who hated history otherwise, I was really absorbing all of this, and I wanted to know the truth behind this false representation. And completely driven by, I don't know what it can be called, a junoon, a passion, it began a series of discoveries and exploration to the past, self-motivated, self-initiated, more importantly, self-funded exercise, which almost became a family project. My parents, every vacation meant going to Mysore, meeting members of the royal family. My parents joined along. My grandmother used to help me translate a lot of things that I collected in Kannada, which I was not yet proficient at that point of time in. And, meeting members of the royal family, going to the archives, collecting material, never ever with the idea or the intention that this is going to become a book. It was just Swanta Sukhaya, so to say.
Okay.
And this passion and madness continued for 10 long years, even as I was doing my engineering exams and board exams and all of that. And I really can't explain what drove this madness. And I realized that one is the Wadiyar family. They ruled, it was one of the longest reigning royal houses of India, 600 years of rule from 1399 to 1947.
That's right.
And
After Vijayanagar fall, they were the
custodians.
basically, yes, custodians.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everything, including the tradition of Dasara,
Yes.
the Vijayadashmi,
Yes.
the procession, the unbroken chain with the mighty Vijayanagar Empire. So an empire, a kingdom like this, which also was highly progressive when it came to modern, measures of women's education, economic development, socio-cultural, progress, and Mysore becoming, and thereby Karnataka today, the foundations of modern Karnataka that were laid by this family. I found that there was hardly anything written about them. And that's also one of the banes of Indian historiography, where I think the history of India gets limited only to North India and Delhi. And, we learn about the most insignificant and smallest of dynasties, which contributed absolutely nothing other than tyranny to this country. The Lodhis and Tughlaqs. And I mean, we have pages and pages about all of these, but huge parts of India, South India, the Northeast of India, many other, kingdoms of India, they don't even feature. So the historical narrative of India, I think, needs to reclaim itself from the narrative of Delhi. So that's when many well-wishers, suggested that why don't you put all of this together? You've collected so much material about the entire dynasty after being interested in just that one king and queen, to write a comprehensive volume on the entire family. And that's how, totally by chance and as a happy accident, the Splendors of Royal Mysore came about 12 to 13 years ago.
Okay, that's a wonderful story, actually. When you were saying that history that my grandmother made so interesting, why was it made so boring in school? That reminds me of a quote by Pula Deshpande. He had said in a speech that Shivaji Maharaj, who was so interesting in storybooks, who was so inspiring on stage, suddenly he came in history books and I didn't want to learn anymore, because all I was learning was the dates, and I was learning, who said what to whom in what context. And it was completely boring. You're absolutely right. I also agree with your point that we have so much of history all over India, but instead we focus on a few Delhi-centric dynasties. So the entire focus of Indian history, or at least the modern Indian history, has been only in and around Delhi, which needs to be broken down. So your book was a wonderful beginning. And that book also, I think, gave you your first taste of controversy. The chapter on Tipu Sultan in that book, I think, ruffled some feathers in Karnataka. Yeah. So did that make you realize that history writing in India is a little fractious? It's not as simple. Okay, a lot. It's not ample or as it should be. There are a lot of other factors that you need to be, mindful of. Did that change your mind? Did that make you want to reconsider history writing, or did you know this is what you want to do?
No, I think it strengthened my resolve further, because whenever I'm pushed to the wall, I think I bounce back with more. I don't appear so aggressive, but when it comes to someone testing my resolve, then, if you push me to the wall, then I bounce back with more greater force and strength. So that's exactly what happened with this book. I mean, I was a newbie author, young person in my late 20s, and I was called to give these talks. This was 2007-8 I'm talking about. And there was, I think, one incident I still remember where it was on the interregnum period, the 40-year interregnum period of Hyder Ali and Sultan. And I was just stating facts. And there was this one particular section which raises heckles even now about Tipu's so-called secularism or the lack of it. And the visible, witnesses of his tyranny. And I was actually reading out from some of his own letters where he's asked his generals and soldiers to demolish a temple or a church, and so many conversions done in Mangalore, in Malabar, in different parts of South India. And while I was even beginning to say all of this, the group stood up. It was some Tipu Sultan fan club or something like that. It started shouting slogans and throwing paper rockets, and the talk had to be abruptly cancelled. And my father, who was sitting in the audience, one of them went and told him that, you have only one son. So if you're really concerned about his life, and you better watch out. And so, in fact, that day, my mother took a promise from me that you're not going to talk about Tipu Sultan ever in public. And I don't know, now that she's not here anymore, I've very valiantly gone ahead and broken that promise. And I'm going to be writing a biography on Tipu Sultan. So I hope all the other, listeners, I keep joking that I need to increase my international, reach and network, so that if I'm hounded out of India, I can find asylum elsewhere. But so it is, what you say is perfectly true, Shefali, because I mean, like Shivaji in your state, Tipu Sultan in Karnataka is someone who has been appropriated by contemporary politics in such a perverse way that any kind of objective assessment of these characters of the past becomes so difficult to do. And it's an irony that Tipu Sultan's summer palace in Bangalore is in such a poor state. The armories where he manufactured one of the first rockets and so on against the British, these armories are crumbling, and there's no governmental or public interest in preserving these the legacies of Tipu Sultan. But then any assessment of him becomes it's a holy cow, so to say. And with you have this whole Tipu Jayanti, which the Congress government in this state tried to perpetrate, and which actually led to a lot of social unrest, because after so many years, he died in 1799, and even now that Tipu Jayanti, it actually made people outside the Sangh Parivar and BJP. You had actually the Christian groups also coming out against the celebration, because he was a tyrant who also killed the Syrian Christians in Mangalore and so on. So these characters of the past are extremely polarizing, extremely difficult to deal with. But I think if it's a historian who doesn't take on the gauntlet, who else would? So
absolutely.
So I think it's an occupational hazard, and I know that now it's slowly. Those days it used to get very, very. I used to get very upset. I was a lot more sensitive. I was younger and more inexperienced. Now I think your skin grows thicker, that it doesn't really matter. You know that if people are criticizing you, it's better than the fact that they're ignoring you. So it's fine.
Yeah. And ultimately, as a historian, your commitment is only to the historical truth, nothing else. Incidentally, the same thing that you're talking about, exact same thing is true about Shivaji Maharaj in Maharashtra, right? Many of the forts are in very bad condition, but it's like every time somebody wants vote, they'll remember Jai Shivaji, Jai Bhavani. But when it talks about seriously preserving history, it's very, very few people are really interested.
Yeah.
But
you have an entire political party on his name.
Yes. Who have played politics in his name, but who are doing absolutely nothing to adapt his real principles in the state. But anyway, that's a political comment. Who knows? I may have a FIR against me for that. But you're talking about Tipu Sultan. Incidentally, just today I read that today is 11th of December, 12th December is the day when he perpetrated this horrifying massacre of the Kodavas in Kurk. And that is why they still remember this day out of sorrow, and those wounds have never healed. So I'm glad that you are going to write a biography of Tipu Sultan, and hopefully it'll talk about truth and nothing but the truth.
Yeah, you spoke about Kodavas. One addition to that, I think Diwali has just gone, and we have the entire community of Mandya Mayangars in the Mandya district of Karnataka. About 600 of them, men, women, and children, actually hanged in public over a long series of trees, banyan trees that were there in that region, Melukote and so on, only because. And what was their crime? The displaced Maharani, Lakshmi Ammani, she was actually negotiating with the British to depose Tipu Sultan, who had usurped her husband's throne. And she was doing these negotiations through two of her agents who belonged to the Mandya Mayangar community. Now, Tipu Sultan chased these people, Tirumal Rao and Narayan Rao, they were chased all over the place. They went away to Madras presidency and shelter there. Now, when he could not catch these two men, he decided in a very perverse way that I will take revenge against their community, their entire community, who had absolutely no role to play in this,
Nothing to do, yeah.
no participation in the politics. So all these people were killed in broad daylight. And to this day, descendants of that family, they do not celebrate Deepavali, which was when they were hanged. So that day is actually celebrated as a day of mourning and Shraddh by the descendants. Many of them don't even know why they do it. When the whole country celebrates Diwali on one particular day, it's a few days after that this community celebrates Diwali. The famous NDTV journalist Srinivasan Jain belongs to this community, and when I mentioned this to him, he was like quite surprised himself. He did not know much about it. But be that as it may, so this when we talk of living legacies and living wounds, I think history needs to give us that space to heal these wounds of the past, as you rightly said. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, so to say, of these wounds of the past which we have not healed. So that's why they are allowed to fester, and it becomes like a cancerous growth, and it continues to, cause social upheaval to this day. That's why almost all our, prime time debates, discussions, conflicts today are around historical topics about Aurangzeb, about Tipu Sultan, which road to name as what building to rename, which city to be renamed as. So this preponderance with the past, unfortunately, dominates our national discourse. While we should have made peace with all of this, stated the facts of the past, stated these wounds, healed and moved on with the future by not whitewashing all these excesses of the past.
You're absolutely right. But somewhere I think it's also because history writing in India officially has always been an exclusive preserve of certain prima donna historians who have basically said that just because they are trained historians, so-called, whatever they say is history and no one else has a right to talk about history. So they've basically guarded their turf very, very zealously. And these are the people who are on the boards of all universities. These are the people who decide what goes into our school books. So we have been here listening and reading a very sanitized version of our history, where they decide what is to be included and what is not to be included. In such a situation, when somebody like you or anyone else starts talking about history, there is a very real danger, and you have probably experienced it also, that you will be slotted in a wing. You'll just be labeled as a right-wing historian or a left-wing historian, and that's it. And that is, nobody is willing to judge your work or any historian's work on its own merit, but just on the subject, and they will decide that you belong to this wing or the other. So how have you sort of tried to guard yourself from that trap?
There's absolutely, I think there's no, because kuch to log kahenge, logon ka kaam hai kehna. So I think, as I said, that thick hide has just grown, and I think your work should just speak for itself. Because as I said initially, these epithets and all of this would hurt, but then there are no wings on either side. So so it's just that I think in India, it was Arun Shourie who had said, to call somebody to become secular, you brand everyone else as communal. So that's exactly how it works, even in the realm of history, which is so contested. You're absolutely right about the historiography of India, and Shefali, that's such a paradox that even during the British time, when we were under colonial rule, while you had the Orientalists, and the colonial historians, the Orientalists, of course, were looking at India from this whole mirror of fascination for India and all of that. The colonial historians were looking at deriding Indian traditions, using it also as a tool to advance the missionary work and conversions and all of that. At the same time, there was a parallel stream of history which was thriving, which was that of the nationalist historical writing, led by several Indian writers from Maharashtra, from Bengal, P.K. Rajwade, or whether it was Jadunath Sarkar, Savarkar, so many of these people, R.C. Majumdar, Neelkant Shastri. So even under colonial rule, there was a freedom of expression, freedom of enunciation in historical discourse, which was allowed. But then, ironically, after independence, that freedom was completely stifled, because the entire, the gatekeepers of historiography became this band of Marxist historians who did not allow any kind of parallel narrative, any kind of dissenting voice to thrive at all. And these are the same people who all the time talk about freedom of expression and liberal thoughts and all of that. Whereas they were the ones who killed every parallel thought. And a discipline like history, which thrives on dissent, on differences of opinion, on debate, on discussion, because there is really nothing called an absolute truth when it comes to
That's
history.
right.
Just
Yeah.
each person's limitation of the available material, the biases, the so many things which limits one's interpretation of the facts on hand. So there needs to be thousand flowers which bloom, as Mao had said, for something else in the field of history too. But then, unfortunately, there's been only one kind of narrative that has gone on, and careers have been destroyed in the past. Because a lot of professors of history whose lives depend on, say, fellowships, on all of this university jobs. Anybody who took a contrarian view to the official Congress / Marxist kind of version of history, particularly even of the freedom movement, anybody who said anything outside that realm, their careers were ruined. So that's one reason, I think, for so long it's just been one kind of story that we've heard in almost every contentious aspect of our past. The medieval part of India, ancient India has to be derided, and where there are no conflicts, you create new conflicts between castes, communities, religions, etc. Whitewash the sins of medieval India and the invasions. And modern India, you have the classic case of how the freedom movement is shown as just one simple stream,
Yes.
totally ignoring all the parallel streams that came through. But I think now, in the last couple of years, thanks to also, I think, social media, and you being one of the pioneers of, that medium, which kind of democratizes knowledge and information to people across the board. And I think we must take this occasion to also, for whatever people call his faults out, etc. This handle of True Indology that is there
That's
on
right.
Twitter,
Yeah.
who is able to bust, the nonsensical myths of so-called eminent historians who will come and tell you that, Holi was actually invented by the Mughals, and there is a painting which will show Krishna is showing the Eid ka chand, all kinds of fantastic nonsense. And this so-called anonymous account is able to bust all those myths with sources and quotations, which shows, their turf is endangered. There is no one source of history anymore, which only they are going to perpetuate. And so more and more people are now, I think, coming out who do not belong to any boxes.
That's right.
Strict ideological, boxes or political parties, and thankfully so. People who are able to say the truth as they see it for what it's worth, or at least provide that parallel narrative to the reigning, version of history.
Absolutely. Before I go to your book on Savarkar, which obviously is the talk of the town, I want to talk to you. I want to ask you about your journey as a biographer of two great musical legends, the Veena Maestro Balachandar and Gauhar Jan. Both these books are very, very interesting. Both of them deal with personalities who were legends on their own and who also had the quirks of character. So, what made you choose these two particular icons as the topics of your books? What was about their life stories that really pulled you as a writer, as a biographer?
I often say, I don't choose my subjects. My subjects choose me. As eerie as that might sound, it was again the same serendipity which ruled, particularly in Gaur Jan's case. So I was researching on the Mysore kings, and sitting in the palace archives, by chance there was this box file that I opened of all the visiting musicians who had come to Mysore, and she was one of them. And there was just a couple of letters, papers about her, and a small half-a-page biodata about who she was, and said she was the first commercially recorded artist of the subcontinent, and a diva at that, a huge celebrity of her times, a page 3 person. But then, and she was an Anglo-Indian. She was born of a British grandfather, an Armenian Christian father, then converted to Islam and became a Tawaif. And she died in Mysore in 1930, very lonely and, with nobody by her bedside to shed tears for her. And the letters that she had written to the Maharaja's government were all entreaties saying, please increase my salary, don't cut income tax. And it was a very sad story of a reigning legend who was who was almost, in the last stage of her life, so sad and desolate, quite like Umrao Jan and Rekha's, portrayal of her done so beautifully in the film. And that just caught my attention. And I said, this lady's story deserves to be told. And I honestly didn't know how, because I just stumbled upon her. And from there, to trace her from the place of her death through the length and breadth of India, over 4 years, from her, it was literally like searching for a needle in a haystack, because from the place of her birth in Azamgarh to Banaras, Rampur, Darbhanga, Calcutta, where she lived for most of her life, then Mysore, where she died, Bombay, Madras, then also went to Berlin, because the German agent who came to record her voice on the 78 RPM gramophone shellacs in 1902, when she recorded first, this guy was from London, but a German agent. And Frederick William Gaisberg. So his diary was there with his family in Berlin, and I managed to source it there to get information about how she bargained for a high remuneration. She was getting 3,000 rupees per recording session in those days, which made her this flamboyant, hedonistic, very feisty kind of a lady. And then also London, different parts. In fact, London and the UK helped me so immensely in that sense, because her mother, Badi Malka Jan, was also a great poet. Most of these tawaifs were also very, very erudite when it came to the only women taxpayers of those times. Someone who were educated so much that they were also penning verses, poems. So she had written an entire divan of Urdu ghazals called Makhzane Ulfate Mallika, or the treasure trove of Mallika's love, which I searched all across India in all the Rampur Raza Library, Allah Baksh Library in Patna. Nowhere it was available. The only copy was available in the British Library in London. And that's how, thankfully for the British Library, for all the loot, etc., at least our archival documents are sitting safe there. And here, Kaudi ke daam pe big gaye hote everything. So it's good that at least it's preserved there. So it was literally like putting together pieces of a jigsaw puzzle to bring this story of this fascinating woman, which also, Shefali, made me understand that when recording technology came to India, all across the country, it was actually women who embraced it first. North, south, east, west. The pioneering recording musicians of the time were all women. Most of them belonging to the Tawaif community, the Devdasi community in South India. But then they were the ones. But their stories, their lives have been rubbished away, because most of them were rubbished away as common prostitutes and excised from national discourse. And for somebody like me who had a childhood passion with classical music, from the age of 4 or 5 when I started learning Carnatic music, the life of an artist is something that is seldom spoken about in our musical traditions. Art form is given such a big importance that you say, what is there to talk about the artist? The art is so great, it's so. But what is the journey that an artist goes in the whole sadhana of that art form? What are the travails one has to undergo as a performing artist, and the twists and turns, the quirks, all of that of a performing artist? These never get documented, because the artists themselves most often are very self-effacing and so on. So it just doesn't come out in public. And Veena Balachandar, of course, was an exception to that rule, where he documented every little detail of his own life in huge albums that he used to put together. Everybody who was against him, a reviewer who wrote bad things about his concert, that review would be put and colored and annotated with all kinds of abuses against the reviewer. So it was his catharsis against the person who was mean to him. And so it's a delightful man. And one of my gurus, I have a couple of gurus, fortunate to learn under Srimati Bombay Jayashree, and also Dr. Jayanti Kumaresh in Bangalore. And Jayanti Akka's guru was Dr. Balachandar. And so she used to tell me a lot about him in the music classes, that this man was again an iconoclast. Just like Bollywood and all the performing arts fields, music too, from the outside it looks very nice, but when you get into the hurly-burly of performance, there's a lot of bad blood, there is a lot of politics. So the Carnatic music mafia, so to say, in Madras, Balachandar was among the few people who had the gumption and the courage to stand up against them and take cudgels on behalf of the purity and sanctity of the art. And for that reason, he
Okay.
was ostracized again. Nothing about him written anywhere. He was literally a pariah in the musical world. And so maybe characters who get maligned, misunderstood, etc., they are the ones who always come seeking redemption from me in a limited way. And that's how Balachandar ji also, caught my attention to be penned into a Bible.
Talking about people who are misunderstood and maligned, I don't think there is anyone in this country who is more misunderstood, who is more maligned, and who is deliberately painted in a dark light than Swatantraveer Savarkar, despite having had such a remarkable life. And your book actually did a lot to bust the myths around him, to stop the lying propaganda. I want to know what made you first of all think of Savarkar as the subject of your book, and what are the preliminary steps that you had to take to write this book.
Wow. um, to be honest, I mean, there was just passing mentions, references of him. My mother was a Maharashtrian Brahmin, and so there was a lot of, talk about him references to him, etc., in family circles. But I don't remember having read about him, formally in any of my textbooks while I was growing up. And it was only much later, I think, during the Vajpayee regime when his plaque was established at Kalapani, and then that was thrown away by Mani Shankar Iyer, and there was that whole fracas around it. Since then, if you see, almost every election rally, every political discourse has somehow been centered around this individual who died way back in 1966. Last year, Maharashtra elections, one of the BJP manifesto items was, if we are elected, we will give him the Bharat Ratna. And for that, there was contestation from another side. So, we spoke about Tipu and Shivaji Maharaj, etc., who, intrude our contemporary politics. I think this man takes the whole cake in that field, where everybody wants a piece of him, either to deride him or to appropriate him. But what is the intellectual output around him? There is next to none. Because the last biography that was written on him was when he was
by
still alive.
Dhananjay
Keer, and that was 1960s. And I just see that there is, even for a person whom you may love to hate, you can hate somebody only after you get to know that person. Here there is blind hatred or blind love, both of which is bad, both on the side part of his opponents as well as his so-called proponents, who have really not bothered to understand the man, what he stood for, the kind of views that he had, many of which his so-called proponents today would find very embarrassing to probably defend as well. So, but then, and a precocious, writer who had a poet, a writer, a journalist, a playwright, thousands and thousands of pages of material that he had penned in his life. Somebody needed to actually sit and read those, the originals being in Marathi, and most of the historians from outside that area not bothering to probably get into it. Of course, there was an agenda to calumnize him and all of that.
That's right.
So yeah, in fact, again, I go back to my mother, who was quite skeptical when I started the project, saying, are you really sure? You've already burnt your fingers with Tipu Sultan. Your effigy was burnt in MG Road here in Bangalore. Savarkar is like taking it to a new level altogether of trouble. But then I said, no, look, this is a person who, again, I think deserves that redemption for, as you rightly said, the kind of contribution that he has made to this country, the freedom struggle, the shaping of political ideologies and thought processes. So it took me again 3 to 4 years to actually research original, authentic material about him. And there again, UK and London becomes the one-shop stop, where I spent a couple of months in London, the British Library, the National Archives of UK, where there are thousands and thousands and thousands of reams of archival documents about him, seldom accessed by historians. Back in India too, the Nehru Memorial Museum, where I was a senior fellow, has the entire Savarkar private papers, about 40,000 pages of microfilm documents of every letter. He was under surveillance both by the British government and Nehru's government. So every letter that came in and out, all of that preserved there in NMML. Again, these microfilms were never accessed by all these people who wrote so many books against him. So it's very, very astonishing that you build up an entire architecture of hatred around somebody without even bothering to see what that person has said on vital issues on which you attack him. And so
True.
that, and also, big friends like you who helped me, translate a lot of the Marathi, documents, and you put me in touch with so many people, Dr. Subodh Naik, Raja Pundalik,
Yes.
who unfortunately no more, who took me to Savarkar's birthplace in Bhagur in Nashik. Meeting members of his family too, Ranjit Savarkar, his grandnephew, and all of them. So it was a collection of all of this Marathi documents, archival documents, colonial papers, interviews, oral histories, all of that going together to put this, volume together, because I wanted it to be unassailable as far as on facts are concerned. Your interpretation could be anything, but then facts, particularly, there should be a definitive volume which maybe generations after me could also use as a fallback, option on any research they need to do on this very, very contentious and misunderstood, ideologue.
In fact, what I like about your book is that your book too does justice to the different facets of Savarkar's personality. The man was a genius. He was not only a very gifted writer, he was a tireless social reformer, he was a freedom fighter, of course. He was also a brilliant political strategist. And all of this comes out because, as you say, your book is about facts, not about a narrative or not about hearsay. So it's a tremendous labor of love, and I'm speaking this as a fan, not as an interviewer.
Thank you.
I
Thank
love
you.
that book.
Thank you.
Now let's move on to your future projects, which are again going to be, there is part 2 of the Savarkar book coming out, and also you've just announced some 2 very ambitious projects, one on Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and one on Tipu Sultan, who are actually 2 personalities which are diametrically opposite, but at the same time they have been appropriated by their different states by some people for political reasons. And it's like you're walking into a minefield in many ways. So what is your approach going to be? Could you tell us a little more about these future 2 projects? And I also want to know, I know there is not much time, but I do want to know about the archives, the musical archives that you are setting up for an institution. So could you talk a little bit about that as well?
Sure, Shefali. Yeah, these 2 books. There's also a third book on, like I said, the history of India is not just Delhi. So I'm trying to bring out stories of heroes as well as dynasties from different parts of India. Lachit Borphukan from Assam. There is a
Assam.
Rani Abbakka from Gullar in Karnataka. So all these people who don't feature in our history textbook, the compilation of all their stories. And these two landmines, of course, I really hope I don't have to take shelter outside India after these 2 come out. But then I think I'm going to, the only approach I would take is adherence to the truth, to the facts, to the documentation that comes my way, without coloring it with any kind of agenda or ideology, without having any preconceived ideas. I mean, in my mind, I probably think Tipu is a bigot, but if the documents state otherwise, I'm willing to be corrected and state it as things are, as they stare me in the face. And I think that principle is the most important for a historian. That you will obviously have your political tilts, your ideological biases, all of that. But when it comes to the narration of the work, I think there it's only the facts on hand that needs to speak a lot more than whatever biases you have. So that's the only approach as far as I can think of, and I hope I can do justice to these very, very difficult, very, as you rightly said, so hotly contested, appropriated figures. I mean, James Lane wrote that quite bad things about Shivaji, and you know what happened in your hometown in Pune with the Bhandarkar Institute attack and so on. So I hope there are no more libraries or my house or anything attacked after these 2 books come out. That's the only hope and prayer. About the archive, yes. So this was actually set up in 2011, and this was a fallout of the Goharjan book. So as a student of music, I also wanted to analyze her singing. And so the book actually comes with a CD of her digitized, 78 RPMs. But to get those RPMs was very, very difficult. You don't find those machines anymore. Most of these discs, are found in raddi shops, in flea markets and shanties where people have thrown it away. Those needles are no longer available, which go on those 78s. So I got a fellowship in Berlin, and staying in Berlin, I made a tour of almost all of Europe and saw one fascinating thing, that almost all those places, London, Paris, Vienna, Berlin, had a national sound archive, an institution which housed, vintage collection, not only of music, but also voices, of the past.
Okay.
For instance, you had this fascinating archive in Berlin called the Laut Archive, where there were almost 100 odd voices of Indian prisoners of war of the First World War, who were lodged in German, war camps as prisoners of war, and they put a gopu in front of them and asked them to say something in their native language, in Punjabi, Pushto, Tamil, Sindhi, and all of this, the voice of Lala Hardayal, of Tagore, of Subhash Chandra Bose, of Gandhi, and so many others. And most often, these people there used to ask me, "Doesn't India have a national sound archive?" And as an Indian and as a student of history and of music, it would really embarrass me that we don't have such an institution here. So, on coming back, I actually made a very detailed proposal to the previous government of India, the UPA government, which we know had other preoccupations, not interested in all of this. So that proposal went nowhere, and that is when very coincidentally I came across Mr. T.V. Mohandas Pai, who was then with Infosys, and he said, why do you want to go behind governments? You set it up as a private trust, and I'll give you the seed capital for that. And so based on that, we imported all the machines from Europe, from America, to digitize the records so that the fidelity of sound transfer is maintained. And the process is continuing even now. There's a technician who sits there and keeps digitizing. We've collected about 15,000 gramophone records, rescued them from kabaddi shops and chor bazaars. And these cover classical Carnatic, Hindustani music, folk music, theatre music, the Marathi Natya Sangeet of Bal Gandharva and Sundrabai and all of those people, and early cinema, voices of great leaders, patriotic songs, all of this, a huge repository of our cultural inheritance. And this is, since this is not my personal property, it's the inheritance of every young man and woman of India. I put it all up on open source. So on SoundCloud, if one actually goes and types archive of Indian music, you'd find about 3,000, 4,000 tracks which have already been uploaded free of cost. One could listen to this, and these date back to 1902, when the first recording was made by Gohar Chand, till the time the Copyright Act allows you 60 years from the date of publishing. So about 1960, till then, all the things have been uploaded there. This is a project in continuum, and I do hope at least this government of India, which talks a lot about also digital India, digital India just need not be that I can pay my bills online. I can, those are important, but then can technology also help in preserving our culture, our heritage? Abroad there is an entire discipline called digital humanities, where the whole technology to preserve vintage recordings or books and manuscripts and all of that is also a tool and technology which is employed. So I hope that Digital India's realm goes beyond just the utilitarian things that we have, and becomes a tool for preserving culture. The All India Radio, has a huge cachet of our oral history right from 1931, when radio broadcast began. So a slice of this country's past, the voices, the interviews of great leaders, the speeches they made on important occasions, all of this. And even as we speak, I think they're getting lost, erased, and destroyed. And nobody sheds a tear for all of this, because this is intangible cultural heritage. And someday we'll be that how many ever $1 trillion economy and this and that, and we'll be the world's largest superpower and great army. But what is it if we do not have a culture, if we do not have an identity, and if we are so much poorer that we can only give our children these atom bombs and nothing else of our past? I think that is something to really, really ponder about and see how these aspects, the intangible cultural heritage, which is a plenty in this country, can be preserved and can be bequeathed and passed on to the future generations. Urgently, I think that needs, a look, even as we tackle the roti kapda makan, That is, of course, a priority area for any government, for any country. But it's not that till that solves, we will not look at this aspect of our national life
Absolutely.
at all. So I think this has to go in parallel somewhere.
That is a very, very valid thought, and a thought that you're all, we will all basically have to live with. That what to do and how do we preserve our intangible cultural heritage. Now
Yeah.
I'll leave the floor open for questions. Thanks a lot once again. It's
Thank you.
always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Shefali.
We have a question from Shruti Sagarika.
Is it audible?
Yes, please.
Yes, Namaste, Shefali
Namaste.
ma'am. Namaste, Vikram
Namaste.
sir. This is Shruti, and I have two general questions, not exactly regarding your book. First question is there is inconsistency in the Hindu religion, inside the Hindu religion. We have divisions. Like some people, they are not. We don't have a consensus when we follow the Hindu religions. And that was, I feel, according to me, it was like some group of people, they have misled the generations in the way following Hindu rituals is something which is orthodox. So I feel it is
What's
existing
your
in the
question,
society.
ma'am? What's your
The
question?
question, yeah, the question is how to overcome, in what ways we can overcome the inconsistency that we find inside the society regarding Hindu religion. That is first question. Like people should not find it orthodox to follow Hindu rituals. So what are the best ways we can find the solution for that? Second is why incomplete history is being told to us and to our future generations for years together. For all these years, the incomplete history has been told to us, to our next generations also. So
Yeah.
how long it will be going on, and what are the best ways we can pass it on to our next generation or the current generation also?
Over
Thank
to
you
you,
so much.
Vikram.
You would want to take the first question, Shefali? Considering
You start with this. You start with the second one. I'll see what the best I can do. Though I'm sure you're perfectly capable of answering both the questions. So have a go.
I'd try a little on the first. I think you are more of the champion on the first one. So I'm actually happy that there is no one way of the Hindu religion. There's no standardization. There's no one book. There is no one messenger. There's no gospel truth which people do not subscribe to, and so you are condemned to hellfire. You have to bring everyone into your fold unless and until they follow this. They have to be killed. I'm very glad that we don't have that, and that diversity of opinion, where even you can be an atheist, and the Charvak school within the Hindu philosophy allows this kind of a contrarian view. You can be an atheist and still be a Hindu. There's nothing blasphemous in our poetry, in our religious poetry. The entire corpus of Ninda Stuti, where you love your God so much that you can also do a Ninda of him and throw invectives on him. Our gods have routinely got cursed by sages, their wives, when they misbehave with the wives of sages and all of that. Imagine that there's nothing called a blasphemy, that the minute you draw a cartoon somewhere, you'll be beheaded. So this openness, I think, is a boon, and I would actually look at it that way, rather than actually crave for a standardization or for everybody to follow a particular thing. And the thing is, what is orthodox? It's up to you. The freedom that I think Hindu religion gives to you. It's not even a religion. It's a way of life where each of us follows different different kind of different modes of worship, different gods to worship. In my own house, I mean, my father is a devout Vaishnava, my mother was a Shaivite, and I follow the Shakta tradition. And so in the past, people were probably at each other's throats saying, "My God is greater than yours," etc. But then we have that freedom to follow the God of a personal choice rather than a group, hysteria, which is what is causing all the problems to the rest of the world. So what is seen as a handicap of the religion, I would actually see it as its inherent strength, which is what has made it survive for so many centuries of cultural and political onslaught from people of every shade on it. About the second question, well, that is the problem which I think I underlined, that history has been monochromatized, it has been monopolized by a certain vested group. And the only way of breaking that thraldom is by more and more, historians who do not belong to any fold, who come out and start publishing, new work, either through books, through different other mediums, through films, through social media, to bust the myths and the kind of biases that exist against our past and against its depiction. So, of course, a lot of people, rue that even this government has done very precious little about changing our history textbooks, and that's a constant, I think, lament of many, well-wishers, even on social media and so on. But I think at some point one should stop expecting too much from governments, and it is individual, people who can do a lot more. Of course, the scalability, the reach of the government is unmatched. So while that is the most desired outcome, till the time that happens, I think individuals can do a lot. Sessions like these, which kind of talk about various aspects of history which have never been spoken about, publicly and so on. I think that's the only way one can bring out those suppressed voices of the past, which were never given a platform.
That's a very good answer. And I agree with everything that you said, that our strength is that we don't have a cookie cutter approach, that everybody has to worship the same God, everybody has to congregate in the same manner. We have always recognized those differences and even celebrated them. So that is the inherent strength of Hindu Dharma. Any other questions? Are there any other questions? I guess no. Titiksha? Okay,
Thank
I
you.
don't see. Okay.
Yes, Vikram, it was so fascinating to hear so many little stories come through. My question is that it seems that you so deeply, almost a decade into the royal splendors of Mysore, and then, Gohar Jan came out of it, and now you're moving on to Tipu Sultan. How do you differentiate between an historian and as a person? How do you come out of these characters, or are you just living in that land of those characters and mythologies? How do you make a distinction?
Yeah,
that's a very good question, actually. Very good question.
No, it is. Yeah, very true, Titiksha. I think you become schizophrenic somewhere. And I usually say, a biography is akin to a love affair. You fall in love with the subject initially, and that is the only reason why you go ahead with this whole journey of, putting your time, your emotions, your money, a lot of things into exploring that subject. And this carries on for so long. And with every biography, I think a part of the biographer dies, because you have gone through the highs, the lows of another life. You've lived a complete life. You probably know more about that person than that person himself might know about himself or herself, because you've seen all aspects of that person from the past. And for me too, it was particularly Gohar Jan. I mean, she continued to haunt me for a very long time, because I've gotten so emotionally involved with resurrecting her from absolutely nowhere, that even many years after the book came out, the book came out in 2010, but even after that, there would be tidbits of information that would come from somewhere. It was a with every new edition of the book, there were new information that would get updated. So one really doesn't get over a subject, even if you move on to the next love interest of your life. It is a part of you which is still, I think, emotionally very connected to that person. But at the same point, the challenge that a biographer faces is, despite this intense love for that individual that you have, you need to take a step back, and while you're writing the narrative, you need to cut off all your emotional cords and write the narrative almost like a impartial bystander. Otherwise, there's a very thin line between a biography and a hagiography. And you're tempted to do that because you're tempted, especially for a character like Savarkar, you'd want to become his lawyer, his advocate, and know what all calumny has been put on him is wrong, and this is what it is. Look at the material. Most people tend to get carried away that way, where you become someone's spokesperson. So that is again a pitfall one I think must avoid, where they really don't need you as a lawyer. They have led lives which are much more enriched than my own insignificant one, and I think they can their work, their facts, I think that comes on the table speaks louder than what I can articulate on their behalf. So your question is very much on point, that it takes me at least a long time to, it's literally like exorcising the ghost. And it makes me very, very sad and empty from within after a project is over, saying, now what do I do? I mean, there's no purpose in my life anymore, because the whole purpose of your life becomes finding out the truth about this individual. And then for a long time, there is a lull till, as I said, you become so promiscuous enough to find another love interest.
Well, you found two great love interests now and a host of other ones that are going to keep you busy for the immediate future.
That's why I said promiscuity is the only way out.
It's like you're talking about love interest reminds me of Babasaheb Purandare, who has been so consumed with Shivaji Maharaj that he actually refuses to live in the present. I mean, he's physically here, but mentally he is in Shivkal always.
Yeah.
So it's amazing.
In fact, the opening chapter, Shefali and Diksha, about in Goharjan, you spoke about your all the time living in that era. That opening chapter, I was, that semi-sleep kind of a state. I'd just come back from Mysore on one of the research trips on her. And the opening chapter is on her last days, where she comes in as a visiting musician there. And it's a semi-fictional kind of a thing. And that semi-sleep kind of a state, this whole scene played out, to be honest, in my head. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night and writing it down on a piece of paper so that it doesn't escape my memory in the morning. And by morning, actually, I'd forgotten about it. Later when I saw it, that's when, it stuck on, where I said, there's a carriage that is coming, and then the carriage stops in front of this cottage, which is called Dilkush Cottage, where she lived. And I'm describing that whole place where there are bougainvillea bushes.
Where she could smell the jasmine and the mogra.
Yes. So because, I just the previous day I'd gone to that street, and then there were all these facts, the Darbar Bakshi's letter, which says you have been appointed as a palace musician, the salary of rupees 500 and all of that. And there are two maids and one Khan Sama or somebody who's bringing all the luggage and all of that. So all this factual data was there, but that whole scene of how this old lady, and there was a photo of her with gold-rimmed glasses. So, the portrait of her in the last stages, where she comes and says, Allah, I've really traveled all my life. I hope this is my last destination. I don't have to go anywhere else. So all of this actually I literally saw this scene playing out in my head, and that's how it came out. And I was so glad Mahesh Dattani stuck to that as the opening scene of the play too, when Lilet Dubey produced it. And I'm insisting that Ashutosh Gowarikar does that as well. So that was completely a fictitious scene, blame it to the tired, sleep-deprived historians, fantasy of someday, which is what that scene came out of. So if people ask, what is the proof that she actually said this, and where's the documentation? Sadly, there is none. But I think
you'd allowed that much of liberty, that liberty is, of course,
true,
there for you to decide upon, because it doesn't take away the factual material of the book.
True.
As we're running out of time, so we'll just take one more question from Mr. Indrajit Ray.
Oh, hi. Thanks, Diksha. Thanks, Shefali. Thanks, Vikram. Really enjoyed your talk. It was nagging me from the beginning when Vikram, you said, and Shefali also, that we are so much interested in the history of the capital, Delhi. By the way, Calcutta used to be the capital till 1911. That we forget different histories of different states. Um, and it is really sad that as a Bengali, I know very little about Mysore or Maharashtra, Sadashiv or Ahollabai, unless I read the Omar Chitrakatha comics or wait for Bollywood movies. At the same time, I'm sure a Marathi person probably will know very little about Ballal Sen from Bengal. So I wonder, do you think as a child we should be more exposed to different territories of India and the history and different states? How could we bridge the gaps between the so-called two states? Uh, and it's not just about history, literature, music, food. Uh, I mean, back in India, I knew almost nothing compared to what I know now, having come all the way to England. So I wonder how could we have a true union?
Wow, that's such a beautiful question. And yeah, I wish there was a model answer to for this. I don't know. I keep hearing what the government, the prime minister also keeps saying that in every child of India should we should read or learn something about a diametrically opposite part of the country. So a child in Gujarat learns something about someone in Nagaland, a little folk tale from there, or something about the traditions. And I agree, it's not just history; it's about so many other things about our cultural, shared cultural experience. And I think the problem with this country is the sheer expanse. It's a subcontinent. It's really not a country, and it is obvious that so many differences cannot be bridged. And when the center of gravity is Delhi, which and everything gravitates and rotates around that, I think as like you said, even I grew up reading a lot of Amar Chitra Katha, so that I really don't know what the state of that is now. I think there is a dying need for children's literature in that sphere, where you could write simple, small stories about other parts of India and make it probably compulsory reading. In our right from our school system. I do know that there is some emphasis on these aspects in our new educational policy
Education
that has
policy.
come about. But then, yeah, the devil is always in the detail, and we don't know how to implement it. Only again, the sheer size of this country and what to include, what to leave, how much to include. Somebody will feel excluded despite every effort that one might take. So, but then I think somewhere that start needs to be made. I think the adults also need to know so much more to be able to pass it on to the children, right? I mean, it's not as if the adults know everything and we ourselves don't know so much about so many parts of India. So I think that is a big problem. Shefali, you have traveled extensively across India, and how do you see this very important question that in the
What you said, I was about to say that those who can afford it should make their children, should take their children and travel across this country and see different parts of this country, just hear the different languages, interact with people, eat local food, see the landmarks, teach your children stories about them. That's the best way to make your children curious, aware, and to make them develop an interest in the history. Like I do that a lot with my children. I travel a lot, and I travel like a local person, not like, not necessarily just hire a AC Innova and just go from point to point and stay in your nice 3-star hotel. No, you have to talk to people, you have to experience the culture. That, in my opinion, apart from reading, of course, is one of the best ways to understand this country.
I think it's my turn now. I'm Piali, and I'm director of Sampath. And I have this wonderful job of thanking people. I think this has been one of the most liveliest discussions on Right Circle events. So thank you so much, Vikram, Sampath, and Shefali Vaidya, for making this event go beyond just literature and books. You've talked about life, you've talked about history, the process of research, the process that Vikram, you have revealed to us of how you went and you found these pearls from the depths of history, and how you are now bringing it to all of us. You're making it so accessible. You're making it interesting. You're encouraging us to go into those worlds which were past, to understand the past, to shape our future. And that is such an invaluable place to be in. It's so important. So thank you so much for provoking this discussion, for provoking us to think beyond the safeties of existing information, and want to go beyond and go into some of those controversial areas which we do need to understand and know. So thank you once more, Vikram, for a wonderful session. Thank you, Shefali, for taking us through that journey beautifully. Thank you, Titiksha, for opening and for questioning, and to all the people who came and put their questions forward. Again, a very interesting way to get more facts out of you. So, of course, and I have to thank my partner organizations, Oxford Business College, Kriti UK, and of course, Prabha Khaitan Foundation, who absolutely wonderfully enable these sessions to happen and connect us to people like you across the world. So thank you so much, and wonderful audience. You have been marvelous. So I hope you will keep connecting with us across the board. And Vikram, anytime you want to move out of India, which I hope you don't have to and you will not, of course, Birmingham is there for you to welcome you.
Thank you.
To our city.
And to be in the UK would be the biggest, boon, Piali, because I think all our historical documents are sitting there. So I usually joke in the British Library to all the librarians, the wonderful people who assist researchers there, that I'd like to spend the rest of my life here, because some 100 books can just be written, sitting in the British Library India office, which has every little detail of our country so beautifully preserved.
I think that's a fantastic idea. And I hope you continue doing what you are doing, because otherwise these will be forgotten and they will just stay in the dust, and they will stay in London in a museum. And I think we need to get it out of museums, and we need to get it into our lives. So, and for our children, I think it's for the next generation as well, because history is just not going to start from now. History is from the past, and there's so many forgotten characters and stories that's so valuable for our next generation and the generations afterwards, to shape the world in an informed way with truth. And that's what you're trying to do. So again, thank you everybody for absolutely wonderful session. Thank you. Thank you for attending. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.